What if COVID-19 escaped from an American lab? Well, that's not me saying that, it's China Daily citing some weirdo that spoke in a subcommittee in Brussels that was live broadcasted on Rumble. Yeah, that sounds very credible, right? Yeah, well, it doesn't have to be credible, it just has to sound credible for a significant segment of the population in order to poison the well even further, as if the COVID-19 well isn't poisoned enough already. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome back once again to the Propaganda Basement. Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about COVID-19 this episode. Probably I'm going to get some YouTube sanction out of it, or maybe not. I mean, the new regime, the post-pandemic regime in at Google and at YouTube in particular has been a little bit more liberal as opposed to 2020 and 2021. Anyway, that's why you should be a member of the donor circle to be able to support these kinds of things, even if YouTube decides to shitcan it. So, China Daily Global Weekly, May 26th to June the 1st, 2023. But before we get to COVID-19, a short throwback to, I believe it was episode 4 in this season, Gaming as Propaganda, licensed to thrill. So that's how the CCP promotes its latest policy on, well, gaming propaganda. China's granting of permits to foreign online games shows commitment to opening its doors to the wider world, well, wider to the world. Foreign companies are seeking opportunities in the world's biggest video games market as China implements supportive regulatory policies and provides a better environment for global stakeholders, analysts said. In March, the nation granted licenses for 27 foreign online companies, including titles to be published by China's leading technology and internet companies such as Tencent Holdings, NetEase, and whatever. You know my opinion. This type of market is inherently dangerous, and there's that. But more important, notice the framing here. Overseas expansion. Chinese games firms gain competitive edge in the global market. It was the second batch of foreign online games to receive publishing licenses December, when the National Press and Publication Administration approved the first batch of 44 foreign companies for last year. Again, this was probably a conversation that I should be having with someone more knowledgeable than myself on this topic. As you know, I don't game. I graduated from puberty a long time ago, but I will notice this aspect. Games are, of course, a very good vehicle for propaganda. They've been used for propaganda purposes since the 1980s. Unlike everyone else, right, the Western audience can be exposed to anything. There is no regulatory framework. Heaven forbid we have some regulations on the casino style of gaming that effectively grifts off poor people. Meanwhile, in China, you need a license if you're not Chinese to be able to sell your propaganda into China. And of course, there's going to be some ideological censorship on it, and also some other regulatory framework. Now, I'm not saying that everyone should do like China. What I am saying, however, is that in this sub aspect of policy, the West is also opened to Chinese subversion in a way that China is not open to Western subversion. The CCP can send all of its politics and all of its propaganda unimpeded to all of our citizens. We don't even get the right to ask whether this is even a good idea. because heaven forbid we're affecting the free speech of the communist state. But meanwhile, nobody in the West says anything bad about China, and this is especially true in the gaming industry. Nobody says anything bad about China there, even though China subjects them to anal probing type of regulations, and that's all good, because as long as the shekels are flowing and the line goes up, everything is great. So yeah, I'll just note that the CCP wins this one for sure, because at least they try to protect their regime. Again, I'm not under any delusion or illusion that this is about protecting the Chinese people. No. It's all about protecting the regime of the CCP, and in a way that we simply don't. So there's that. This section, Vision China, disappeared from China Daily. This is one of the few China Daily issues that I do have that has still had this section. It disappeared towards the end of 23, which is essentially a set of vision statements for a techno-optimist, techno-totalitarian future in which you pay to China in order to be able to exist effectively, and the enforcement is done via technology. So tech can play positive and proactive roles. Deploy intelligent tech in implementing Xi's 3 initiatives, says China Daily publisher. And I love it that the newspaper quotes itself within the pages of the same newspaper, which is perfectly normal in a communist country. As digital technology becomes a pioneering force in driving the global technological revolution and industrial transformation, and if this sounds like the WEF, it's because it's the same people, more effort is needed to allow intelligent technology to promote the national goal of building of a community with a shared future for mankind, according to Chu Ying-pu, publisher and editor-in-chief of this newspaper. Speaking at the Vision China event on May the 18th, Chu said that the artificial intelligence, represented by ChatGPT in particular, has become a buzzword, and many foreign experts believe that its advent is as important as the arrival of the PC or the internet. Though different views on GPT exists, it is widely hoped that the latest technology will play a positive and proactive role in improving world well-being, Chu said. Yes, I'm sure having ChatGPT will feed people or something. Oh wait, it doesn't, and it can't, and it won't, but doesn't matter. I will, however, note the tone, right? That can play a positive and proactive role. The tone of this kind of propaganda is because during the pandemic project, especially in China, way too many Chinese people have figured it out that, hold on a second, the hyper-technologization of our cities is actually a very bad idea. Of course, it has been memory hold by now, but if you look close enough, you will notice how the pandemic ended in China. And it ended pretty much the same as in Europe. Enough people said enough is enough, and then took it to the streets and started burning shit down. And immediately the pandemic was over. And that's something that the CCP doesn't want to see happening too often, and preferably never. And highly automated surveillance is one way of achieving that. Meanwhile, here's one that aged like fine milk, and then we get again to COVID. Looming U.S. debt crisis stokes fears worldwide as Washington teeters on the brink of a default. Uncertain future awaits global financial markets. And notice that they have protests from left-wing groups mostly. The Writers Guild of America picket line in New York City. The strikes kicked off on May the 3rd with writers demanding better pay. I'm sure the Chinese editor, the CCP editor who was reviewing this page was just laughing. I mean, in China you have strikes of entire villages, and a village in China can have as many as 4 million inhabitants, and the story is immediately suppressed. You never hear about it, even in the neighboring county in China, let alone outside of China. But meanwhile, in the US, you get to use a tiny strike of 20 people with some of the most well-off people on the planet, right? The Writers Guild. Who cares about those people? Nobody, actually. Not even in the US, and that's why the strike lasted for so long. And you get to exploit it for geopolitical purposes on the communist end of the planet. So, the whole world is such a clown show. But anyway, the US government is stoking global economic fears as it faces another standoff over raising the debt ceiling, whatever. How did that go? I mean, it's 2025, still no big deal. And if there will be a big deal this year, it definitely will not be connected at all to the events from May 2023. And definitely the Writers Guild will have no contribution whatsoever, regardless of whether the year 2025 will be a good year economically or a bad year economically. The point here is to show just yet another example of how panic porn is being created. A lot of panic porn is created usually by the rival or by the enemy, if you prefer. And the purpose of it is to keep you scared and do nothing. Because if you do nothing, that's usually good enough. All right, now let's get to the dicey part. The US held liable for COVID-19. EU meeting heard American design engineered early and aimed at profiteering from vaccines. This is really funny. I mean, I would have expected to read this on an obscure conspiracist blog. And again, you will notice the more extreme versions of propaganda that have a chance of actually working are not signed. This article doesn't have an author. It's just signed China Daily. And of course, if anyone sues for libel or for any clarification or for defamation, then China Daily will say, oh yeah, the guy who wrote it no longer works for us. We don't remember his name. Tough. The COVID-19 coronavirus was intentionally released by the US in Wuhan with a target to trigger a global pandemic to raise public acceptance of vaccines, a US businessman specializing in patent auditing said. The US was responsible for the making of both coronaviruses causing the outbreaks of severe acute respiratory syndrome or SARS in 2013 and COVID-19 in the past 3 years. Says Dr. David E. Martin at the International COVID Summit 3 organized by the European Union Parliament in Brussels on May 3. What went wrong, he asked? Nature was hijacked in the name of science. Science was hijacked by US government agencies. Morality was hijacked to coerce a population. And humanity was hijacked. Martin, founding chairman of MCAM International LLC and Batten Fellow of University of Virginia. The pandemic that we are alleged to have happened in the last few years did not happen overnight. In fact, the very specific pandemic using the coronavirus began at a different time. He said he was quoted as saying by Hong Kong-based newspaper The Standard. He said that in 1965, scientists discovered the coronavirus pathogen, an agent that causes disease, and that they could be modified, as in US pharmaceutical giant Pfizer's first coronavirus spike protein vaccine in 1990. But very soon, the medical sector and drug makers found out that the vaccines don't work. Because the coronavirus is a malleable model, it mutates. Every medical publication concluded that coronaviruses escape vaccines because they modify and mutate too rapidly. In 2002, a university in North Carolina initiated a study to develop an infectious replication defective, which Martin interpreted as a weapon to target individuals but not have collateral damage. Characterizing the project as having mysteriously preceded SARS by a year, Martin said the coronavirus that caused SARS was not from China and it was engineered. On COVID-19, he said that it was poised for human emergence in 2016 with a preview about an accidental or intentional release of a respiratory virus from Wuhan. He said the purpose of the coronavirus release was to boost global acceptance of universal vaccination. Until an infectious crisis is very real, present, and at the emergency threshold, it is often largely ignored. To sustain the funding base beyond the crisis, we need to increase the public understanding of the need for medical countermeasures, such as the pan-influenza or pan-coronavirus vaccine. A key drive is the media, and the economics will follow the hype. Pharmaceutical firms need to use that hype to our advantage to get to the real issue. Investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process, he said. Our job here is to say no more, no more gain of function research, period. Most importantly, no more corporate patronage of science for their own self-interest unless they assume 100% liability for their every injury and every death that they maintain. The COVID infection was officially first reported in Wuhan, Hubei in late 2019, whatever. So, you would expect this to see on a conspiracist blog in 2020 or on a conspiracist blog in 2023. To see it in an English language newspaper sponsored by the CCP. But what's more interesting is that even though allegedly this conference occurred in the European Parliament, we get screen grabs from rumble.com with his presentation, whatever. I'm pretty sure it was organized by a certain group in the European Parliament and not necessarily by the European Parliament itself. Not that it actually matters. What matters is that here we see the behavior that we also see in Russia oftentimes, which is let's highlight the people who accidentally or usually accidentally agree with our view, right? I'm sure this particular fella is more interested in some payback against some people in the pharma industry, but in achieving that goal, he also just happens to agree with China's geopolitical goal, which is to drive away the attention onto China with respect to the COVID-19 pandemic. So as a result, they amplify him because, hey, why not? Nevertheless, it was still really funny because if this is the best evidence that China has that that COVID-19 was a cough engineered in the US, I think we can now say, applying the same logic as with Russia, right? With Russia, the logic is that don't believe anything until it's officially denied in the Kremlin. Same thing here, right? Don't believe that China is at fault for COVID-19 until they basically print this. So yeah, it's just okay. Then more friendship and smiles from Xi Jinping, because of course, why not? And then there's this one, which is also funny. It's more America man bad type of propaganda, but with some twists. So it's a huge leftist meme, basically. I mean, America man bad, the series, the coercive diplomacy and its harm. And it basically says, oh my goodness, how dare you sanction communist countries, basically. And it's just relatively big. It's a never-ending type of article. It's just, I'm not going to read it. But I will highlight something that is very, very specific to this kind of propaganda. There you go. The US sanctions and blockade on Cuba cover almost everything from fuel, food, and daily necessities to medicine, leaving the island facing a chronic and severe shortage of supplies. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the US also blocked Cuba's access to raw materials for vaccine production. The People's World, an American news website, pointed out in an article that the blockade imposed by the US had prevented Cuba from obtaining materials for the manufacturers of syringes in time. Since the US banned third countries from selling ventilators to Cuba, Cuba has not been able to purchase the ventilators needed to save critically whatever. So the American news website, the People's World, I haven't checked, but let me guess. It's one of those tanky websites with 3 readers, maybe. So no, that's why I'm always skeptical whenever someone claims, and that includes so-called mainstream sources, not just sources that I'm already familiar with, that they're propaganda gutters. That's why I'm always skeptical and say, well, experts say, the analysts have said, the evidence is in. If it's a story about a certain country, this publication from that country says so. Really? And who is that publication? Who are those experts? Who pays them? It's a question that I routinely get during the Q&A sections and other events or that I attend. Well, how do we discern which is which? Well, this is why I'm making this kind of series, because to be fair, China Daily makes it incredibly easy to basically teach these things. You know, for those who don't know, and there are plenty of people who don't know, I mean, Americans don't realize that, but there are 1.8, 1 point, no more, about 2 billion people who basically speak English as a first language, and another 2 billion people who speak English as a second language. And the world is not the United States. There are at least 3 billion people in the world who will read this or something similar and believe it, because most people do not pay attention to the US. The US is really not that important for the majority of the planet. So they'll say, oh, look, an American publication actually agrees, and oh my goodness, what does US does to poor Cuba? And again, this is not the 1980s anymore. Information travels fast, propaganda travels fast, and on most of the world, the readers are young enough not to remember why Cuba is under sanctions and why it should stay under sanctions, and what was the rationale behind them. And definitely the vast majority of the people who will be reading this article innocently will not know that the People's News is a completely unimportant marginal blog that probably doesn't have any readers besides the newsroom of China Daily. So yeah, COVID-19 came from an American lab. Yeah, because heaven forbid we look at something. But again, this kind of propaganda, including the one that I just read about COVID-19 having allegedly emerged from the US, this kind of propaganda works because, who started it, right? The propaganda war. Because the propaganda, the official information, which turned out to be a lie, was that it started from a wet market and whatever. Please don't notice the virology lab nearby. And why? Because while the US government, or really any US institution, had no involvement, there was some personal involvement by a certain man whose name should be Fauci rather than Fauci, and he wanted to protect his own personal grift. And that's really the one lesson to take away from this. A lot of the big decisions with big consequences globally, and this is true today just as it was true historically, really do boil down to one or two or three people whose personal momentary preferences, personal temporary preference in that moment end up mattering a lot more than any sort of reason or something else. And of course, this kind of propaganda works because people love a conspiracy theory that sounds good. People love stories. And, COVID-19, to be fair, was such a clownish collection of events that, some of the true stories from COVID-19 are unbelievable. So that means there's plenty of room for more fictional stories as well. So yeah. All right. That will be enough for today. Thanks a lot for watching. If you like this kind of content, please do consider a donation. Get into the donor circle. And don't forget to subscribe. And I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.